Welcome to the Yerba Power Podcast, where we share the power of yerba mate with the world. Introducing your host, Devin.
Here at Yerba Mate Power, one thing we also do is empower people with the power to overcome. And I have just such a guest for you guys today. Today's guest is Brent Silkey. He is a man that I admire for his faith, his mission, and his athletic achievements through endurance. He has run multiple ultramarathons, which means running beyond the marathon distance of 26.2 miles, and has previously qualified for the Boston Marathon, which is a feat within itself. What he's done and is doing is taking these athletic feats to raise funds and awareness to end human trafficking in our lifetime. He's partnered with 30 for Freedom, an organization that I've supported and ran with the last 2 years. This year, his goal is even crazier than 30 miles. He'll run a marathon every day for a week in every continent, meaning back-to-back marathons in 7 days while traveling the globe. And his first marathon starts in Antarctica in November. His story is inspirational, and my hope is that you'll not only enjoy this episode, but take action. All right, welcome to the Yerba Power Podcast, and I have a very special guest, and the reason why is because this is a way to make a global impact right now with you guys listening, and I'll get into that. But first, let me tell a little bit of a background. Brent Silkey here, ultra marathoner officially, and now also Boston qualifier. I guess to throw out some more accolades in there, because that's a big deal in the running community. You guys that maybe know a little bit of a runner. I haven't shared too much on that, but I guess where I'm going with this is that I met Brent through running, essentially. We actually haven't met in person. And that's just been another connection, similar to Yerba Mate. It's a shared experience. It's something that you kind of like, I guess there's the joke about CrossFit. It's like how you know someone does CrossFit, so they talk about it all the time. Or how do you know someone's ran a marathon? Because they'll tell you. So, jokes aside, Brent had this vision at 30 years old on his 30th birthday with 30 of his friends to run 30 miles to raise $30,000 to end human sex trafficking in our lifetime. And that vision has long since exploded. And Brent, I'd love for you to tell more about that. And I guess just to let you guys know that are listening, I participated in this a few years back, the last 2 years. And so this is important to me as well, and something I want to share with you guys to listen, and because it's as I mentioned, a global impact. So Brent, I guess just tell us a little bit about, kind of where that took off from and what's been going over the years, and then we'll get into what the big thing is for this year.
Yeah, that sounds great, Devin. Well, it's an honor to join you on the podcast today. For the listeners, I heard about human trafficking when I was a 19-year-old college kid at North Central University in downtown Minneapolis. And the speaker that day was Dr. David Grant, who's the co-founder of Project Rescue. And I'll come full circle about Project Rescue in a minute. But he got on stage at the chapel service that day. And I remember sitting there in the service, hearing the stories of young girls in India who had been trafficked. And they had been rescued. And so they had shared their stories with Dr. Grant. And I just remember sitting there. I was so heartbroken that something like this could be taking place in our world, and that vulnerable people were being taken advantage of. And it seemed like it was all fueled by greed so that the traffickers could make money off of these young girls. And I remember being a 19-year-old kid thinking, I've got almost no money to my name.
Yeah.
I was literally a broke college student, but I'm like, I know God is calling me to do something to make a difference in the lives of trafficking victims and in the lives of survivors. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't really know exactly I didn't have this grand plan, but I determined in my heart that I had to do something about this. And so fast forward a decade, I've been a youth pastor for a decade. We've been raising money for missions, raising awareness for all these projects. And I was like, well, what if we could take the platform of running and utilize it to bring awareness? Because we always like to talk about running. And so while we talk about running, what if we talked about this global issue called sex trafficking? And then what if we could actually raise money to make a tangible difference in the lives of victims and survivors? And so as you alluded to earlier, we decided like, hey, let's invite people. So I called and texted and DM'd people like crazy, like, hey, would you come on Saturday, May 28th to come and run 30 miles with me on my 30th birthday? And almost every person that I talked to was like, no, 30 miles, like, far as a marathon, man. Like, isn't that longer than a marathon? I'm like, well, yeah, it is. And then I would tell them why. And I would reflect back to what Dr. Grant had told me and just some of the stats that we had learned through researching that every 30 seconds, someone becomes a victim of sex trafficking. The average age of a trafficking victim is between 12 and 13 years old. That's like 6th grade or 7th grade equivalent, the average age. And as we looked into it more, we realized that this was a problem not just affecting these rural parts of these, developing nations. This is happening all over. This is happening in America. This is happening in our city where we were, I was working at the church. And so as people heard about why, then they decided a lot of people would text me back and they'd say, hey, I hate running, but I hate sex trafficking more. So I'll be there on your birthday. And so I remember that day, it was one of the craziest days of my life. It felt surreal. We had 123 people that showed up to run. 75 of them did a 5K for freedom, and 48 of us did a full 30-mile for freedom. And by the end of that day, our goal was to raise $30,000. We saw God bring in $81,346 for freedom. And I remember saying, like looking at that number thinking, this is unbelievable. This is more than our goal. I thought our goal was lofty, but 81,000. And so we got to give directly to one of the places we get to support, and we still to this day support, is Project Rescue. So it's kind of that full circle moment from that chapel at 19 years old to now I'm 30, and we're able to give some of the funds to Project Rescue, to Venture, and to Free International. And so I never envisioned, Devin, that it would be anything more than one day. And so the news actually at I think it was either mile 11 or 14, they came and did a story on us while we were running. So we stopped running. The news van came, they set all the cameras up, and we actually shared why we were running. And so that went across the Twin Cities. People heard about it, and like my phone blew up, like messaging on social media platforms. Like people who had my phone number were texting me like, hey, Brent, I can't wait for next year. I'm going to bring my church, my youth group. I'm going to bring my soccer team, my cross country team. I'm going to bring my family who cares about this issue. And so the next year we held another run, and we had 400 people that showed up to run year 2. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like people are understanding that there's actually a problem taking place in our world, and they want to make a difference. And so after year 2, we actually put together an official board for 30 for Freedom. And it's been a crazy wild ride. We're in now 2025 is year 10 for us. And so, we've seen over 15,000 people run for freedom in the last 9 years. And we've seen over $2.5 million raised. And I always want to let people know 30 for Freedom, the way we operate is we have a 100% guarantee where we give 100% of all the donations that come in directly to our partners, Free International, Project Rescue, and Venture. We don't use any of those funds to like fund overhead, buy equipment, anything like that. So when someone gives a donation to 30 for Freedom, they can know that 100% of that's going to go to the front lines.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing, the numbers. And I guess it's important, though, to call out those numbers because you realize there's a lot of evil, but then there's a lot of good to overcome that, and the amount of people that are getting involved. And I hope those listening, whether you want to get involved with running or supporting, but even just being aware of this and sharing it with other people, this episode of just awareness does a lot of good as well, because I think it's one of those topics which came up a lot during the movie Sound of Freedom. The people just kind of do the ostrich effect of just put your head in the ground and ignore the issues. And then when putting it on, a big screen of forcing people to realize this issue exists and and then there's something to do about it, I guess, instead of just standing there and just like ignoring it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to encourage anyone listening to, just not, it's not something that we want to necessarily, highlight the bad, but it's to realize there's something to do here. Yeah. I think that's the main call to action here. Anything else you want to expound upon there?
So this happened the first 30 for Freedom. I was the last one to start the 30 miler. I wanted to make sure everyone got out. They knew where they were going. Our route was marked out. And so as I'm leaving the church parking lot to start my 30-mile run, a lady from the church was like, excuse Pastor Brent, can I tell you a story? And I was like, yeah, can you like do it while we run together? And so she's telling me this story, and she said my daughter was talking to her grandma, and my mom about human trafficking, and my mom she just balked at the idea, like that doesn't happen, like certainly not here. And then the grandma saw a story on the news like that week about a young lady who was trafficked in Bloomington, where our church is and where we were running. And the grandma contacted the granddaughter and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that this was actually happening here in our backyard." And grandma, sponsored her and donated to help make a difference. But it's one of those things where it's literally happening all over the world. And once we're aware of it, it's like, what do we do? People are always like, I hear about this, I've seen a video, or I've seen this, or I've seen, The Sound of Freedom, all that kind of stuff. Like, what do I actually do to make a tangible difference? And it seems like something like 30 for Freedom, it gives handles to this thing that I can actually run or I can walk. We had people who actually were like, I don't do any of the physical movement, but I ride motorcycles. So we had a thing happen this last year in 2024 called Thunder for Freedom. It was all these motorcyclists. They got together and they did like this concert. They did this huge awareness campaign. They raised a bunch of money in southern Minnesota to help fight human trafficking. We have something happening in Rochester, Minnesota next in the spring or in the summer, late summer. They're actually going to they have a CrossFit, like huge CrossFit gym. And they're like, what if we did 30 tons for freedom? So they're literally going to, while the runners are running, they're going to have a bunch of lifters who are going to be lifting the equivalent of 30 tons for freedom, raising awareness and raising funds. So I think it just gives handles to this issue, and then people can have the confidence to know that when they give, if they make $100 donation, that $100 is going to the cause, and we're not saving any of it back. We're literally saying, hey, we want to fund these operations. We want to fund these different things that are taking place and preventing people from being trafficked across the border. We want to help, once someone's been rescued, that's a huge deal, but there's a whole lot that goes into, the counseling from all the trauma and just even new skills training and job training. And we want to make sure they have proper nutrition and education and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that happens, and I'm really grateful for every person who says, hey, I want to do something about this, and they take part with us, So thanks, Devin. Thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah. And that's really cool that there's different outlets, I guess. It doesn't have to be running, that's just your thing or other people's things, right? That's I guess encouraging too, is that, hey, if you got an idea, you get the handlebars to it. Like, and I think it's also, again, I guess hammer this issue. I wasn't aware about it even myself so much. And Middle Tennessee is a huge problem because of the logistics of our interstate system, that are basically like 80% of the U.S. can be reached from Nashville. Because of that's becomes a trafficking hub. And there's lots of organizations around here as well that, help with as you mentioned, rescuing is a huge deal, but the restoring and rehabilitation and just all the trauma and getting someone back into society, it's more than we can imagine. And so, again, thanks, Brent, for what you're doing. Now, this is the moment I really am excited to share, is because we've talked about this, I think, on Instagram, but just to give a little bit of story to the guys. So, I participated in this, and then Brent and I, just message and whatnot. And then there's Jackie Hunt, and I'm going to butcher her last name. Rosma. So I never said that out loud. She is an amazing woman that has run all kinds of crazy ultra marathons. You can find her on Instagram. I had the honor to run with her in Nashville. Basically, the Fleet Feet asked her if she would come, and she did. And so that was during the time when she was running, like, I think a half marathon every day for 300 something days or something ridiculous that she was doing. So we were able to run a half marathon with her that day as like a group in Nashville. And so, long story short, there's this interweaving there, and now that's where I guess this story, that what you're about to do this year. So I guess, Brent, you go ahead and tell what is going on this year.
Sure. There's an event called the Great World Race, and I've heard of a similar event where people run 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. And it always had sounded like one of the most insane, epic adventures of all time, because you literally start marathon 1 on Antarctica and you're running on the ice for your first marathon. And so Antarctica, then you go to Cape Town, then you go to Perth, Australia, then you go to Abu Dhabi, then you fly all the way over to Portugal, Colombia, and then you end in Miami. And this is literally a global event. It gets global media coverage. And so I was talking with one of our sponsors for 30 for Freedom. I said, someday I would love to be a part of the Great World Race and bring the message of freedom around the world. And he goes, well, like, why don't you do it? And I was like, well, it's quite a price tag. The barrier for entry is pretty high. And he was like, well, how much does it cost? And so we were talking about how much it costs. And he's like, well, if you did that, he's like, my wife and I would sponsor you $10,000 towards your entry fee. And I was like, whoa, like that, like for some reason, like I just thought it would maybe, like, how could it possibly happen? But his initial his knee-jerk reflex was generosity. I started talking to other people about this dream, and here we are, early in January, and this event doesn't happen until November, and like I'm fully funded to do this event and take the message of freedom around the world for trafficking victims. And so I'm like, it's honestly, the last 6 weeks have been some of the most insane weeks of my life in terms of just generosity, just things happening that I'm like, whoa, I can't even explain this, but like the Lord opening doors. And so as I had talked with some sponsors, one of them said, well, who's doing this with you? Like, who's going to be a part of the journey with you? And it got me thinking bigger. One of my buddies said, hey, you need to have someone that's coming along to document this through photos and video. You have to. It'll help tell the story. It'll help really get the message out even long after the event is over. And so they said, find out how much it costs to have a video person come with you. So I sent a message to the race director, and he's like, it's the same cost as for a runner. I was like, oh my word, that's crazy. Oh. And now our videographer is like $6,000 away from being fully funded to come on this thing. I'm like, are you serious? So another sponsor was like, hey, like, who's on the team that you want to bring? And I said, I'd love to have Jackie come. Like, Jackie's an inspiration, to lose part of your leg to cancer, to then run with a running blade, and to say, I'm gonna literally overcome one of the most difficult things that's ever happened to me, to run a marathon every day for 104 days in a row and break the world record at the time. I'm like, that's the kind of person that like should be running for freedom with us. So I reached out to Jackie and I said, hey, would you ever want to be a part of the Great World Race? And she goes, oh, it's been a dream of mine. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? She's like, but who can afford it? I'm like, I know, it's crazy. I said, if there was a sponsor that was willing to cover your entry fee, would you be willing to run for freedom? And she's like, absolutely, I would. So I talked to our sponsor, and they're like, well, Jackie needs to be a part of this. And so the sponsor is helping cover Jackie's entry fee to be a part of the Great World Race for Freedom. And so we actually have another young lady from Minnesota who's going to be a part of it. And I can't drop names on this podcast quite yet, but there's actually another person who is like really close. I'm like, oh, come on, that would be so awesome to joining our team as well. And so we leave in November, but we're looking to take the message of freedom around the world. So raising global awareness for a global issue. And then we want to raise $1 million for freedom. And so we'll come out probably next month with some of the project specifics of that $1 million. But we want to help make the greatest impact we've ever made before in our 10-year history this year.
That's mind blowing and so cool. And it's, I think, I could come up with some pithy quote, and I'm sure there's lots of stuff, but it doesn't really matter. I think it's an act of faith, is believing, and then just seeing that something like that happens beyond, what you can comprehend. For me personally, like, that's a way to see the proof of, the goodness of God, but also I think just that our finite minds and dreams, like, of what is even possible, just sometimes is so small. So then the only question is, well, then what's 2026 look like? So,
yeah, good question.
You got to run across the solar system next or something,
So interestingly enough, the guy that started the other 7 marathon, 7 continents, 7 days race, the World Marathon Challenge, he actually, his new venture is, if you go on his Instagram, is so cool because he actually wants to help break the 4-minute mile barrier in space.
Wow.
Literally, he wants to bring people like, so you're not far off of that. That's not my ambition, but what I hope, Devin, through this huge event and all of this stuff that's going to happen, and Lord willing, the funds that come in, is that not only could we make a greater impact than we've ever made before, but could more people say, hey, I want to be a part of something like that ends human trafficking. I want to be a part of an organization that gives 100% of the funds that are donated to the cause. And I mean, one of the crazy dreams that we've had is like, what if there was 30 for in every single state in the United States? What if literally every year there were 50 states that were helping to raise awareness and helping to raise funds? And what if it was like $1 million per organization we support every year that could be raised or more? And so all of these things that have been happening have us thinking bigger and dreaming bigger. And the need is continuing to be there. And so we want to do everything that we can to make the greatest awareness and greatest impact possible.
That's awesome. So let's wrap this up in a nice bow. So first, I would encourage people, well, what can I do? I don't run. I don't blah, blah, blah. Well, one, I would say they can share this episode. They can share 30 for Freedom, the website, and find out more information there. What else? Would you give some action items for people?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that my friend Paul Herkman says it so well. He goes, we want people to move from comfortable to less comfortable on behalf of the poor and the oppressed. And in this case, on behalf of trafficking victims and survivors. So what does that look like for someone listening to the podcast who says, hey, I hate running. I think it's actually maybe sign up for 30 for Freedom and come do a 5K with us. You can run it, you can walk it, you can bring your family, but that gives you an opportunity to step in and say, hey, I'm going to be doing something. I'm going to go from comfortable to less comfortable, and I'm going to raise awareness on social media. I'm going to ask my neighbors and friends to support me. Another way that people go from comfortable to less comfortable, and I've seen this a lot lately, is business owners saying, well, we want to help make a difference. We want to help support, what's taking place from these amazing partners, or we want to help send people like Jackie, to do the Great World Race for Freedom and raise global awareness. And so there's businesses who are getting involved, moving from comfortable to less comfortable as they make these large donations to help things happen. That would be, that's a game changer, those types of things. And then I think there's also people who are like, I'm a leader. Like could I bring 30 for Freedom to my church, to my state, to my business, to my area in the world? And could I help start 30 for Freedom, Middle Tennessee? Could I help start 30 for Freedom, Arizona? Could I help start 30 for Freedom, Texas? And our team is ready to scale. One of our goals this year is to scale to 5 new states in 2025, making impact where we've never made impact before. And so if there's a listener out there saying, hey, I might want to do that, they can go to 30forfreedom.org, and we have a contact button right on the site where people can get a hold of our team and maybe even start a chapter this year or next year.
Nice. 30forfreedom.org. I'll put the link down there on the video and in the show notes, as well as all the ways they can connect with you, Brent. Find out more. Follow the video that'll soon be, announcements and everything else, and all the great things that have happened throughout the years. And anything else that you would like to say to the audience before we leave?
I was challenged one time, and this really hit home for me. Somebody said, if everyone responded to injustice the way that you do, would there be any change in the world? So if there were 1 million people and whatever I do, they're going to do it too. Like if I'm going to give $100 and then 1 million people do it. Okay, we all made it. We took our little bit and we made a lot together. If I do nothing and 1 million people follow my example, then we've not made a difference for victims of trafficking. And so sometimes people they self-disqualify saying, well, I don't have much. Well, I can't do a 30-mile run. I can't do whatever. And I would just say if everyone could do their part, significant things happen. And we had, for me, there's nothing quite like sitting down like face to face with someone who's been rescued and either hearing their story or having them, share certain things. I sat down with a young lady one time. She said, what you guys are doing is you're literally saving lives and you're changing futures. And I think about that often. Okay, it's really cold right now in Minnesota. It's negative something out. Do I really want to go and train for this thing? Not today. I'm about to suit up and go for a run because I'm doing this. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
this is why, saving lives and changing futures. And so I would just encourage a listener, maybe it's, maybe you can't give $1 million donation today, but maybe you could do something and sign up. Maybe you could be a part of raising awareness and sharing something on social media. But if we all do our part, we can help to save lives and we can help change futures.
Well said. Thank you, Brent, so much for joining us and sharing your story. I hope you go and check out 30forfreedom.org to get involved however you feel led to. But don't let this moment pass you by. Do what you can to help in an injustice in our world that should not exist. Thank you for listening.